Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tara Tarango. Welcome to this Administrators Summit on our favorite term right now, learning loss, which just seems to be everywhere now. So thanks so much for joining us. I know we have 90 minutes, which is a chunk of time for any educator, especially administrators, but I'm hoping that this 90 minutes saves you literally scores of hours in research, because there is so much out there that's really good information about learning loss and what you can do to kind of close those gaps. So we hope to have done a lot of that research for you and bring you the highlights to save you some time. So that's what we're here for today. I want to give you a little sense of what we'll go over, and then I'll introduce the team. So we thought these are kind of the pressing questions that are out here right now. What is learning loss and how do I address it? How can I use this ESSER funding? What role does social emotional learning play? And how can I prepare my teachers to really successfully close those gaps next year? And so those were kind of the questions that we started with, that we were hearing the most, kind of angst around. And that really led us to these 5 ways that you can address and overcome any learning loss in your school. So we'll go through each of these 5 through the course of this 90 minutes, right? Having a plan to focus your efforts. Here's spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you the 5 right now. The second one is understand and use that ESSER funding, attending to those social emotional needs, give you some strategies and some tools and some resources for that. Preparing teachers with what we're calling next level PD, and also equipping them with next level resources. So that's what we plan to go through here. Hang with us till the end. We'll also be giving away a lunch and learn. Who doesn't love free food? So we'll have a chance to win a lunch and learn at the end. So I'm going to introduce you to our team here. You have myself, and you also have Dawn. You might see her up there on your screen. Hi, Dawn.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today.
So Dawn and I are the ones who have done the bulk of the research. We also have a team of folks behind us who have helped a lot as well. So I want to send a shout out to them as well. But just like I said, there's so much out there. So we've done a lot of research to really bring you what's practical. So we'll be taking you through these 5 steps live and in person here. But in the background, we also have Heather. So say hi, Heather.
Hi, everyone.
So you may not see her on screen, but she's working this magic in the background. So if you have any technical questions, feel free to put those in the question box on your webcam control panel or your webinar control panel. She can help troubleshoot those. She'll also be helping to facilitate some of the polls, put some things in the chat or question box for you to utilize, that sort of thing. So we really appreciate her helping out on the back end. The other thing I want to make sure you know is that, the last thing we want is you to walk away with 90 minutes and not have a clear picture of how this helped you. So there is a hyperdoc that has a handout, that it's a handout that has all of the resources that we're going to talk about, but it also has this graphic organizer on page 1. And so I think Heather will probably go put that in it's either a question or a chat box, depending on if you're a Mac or PC. They decide to do it differently, but you should be able to access that, or you can use this bit.ly link here. You can follow along. Essentially, it's just a place to write your key takeaways from each of these 5 points, so that you know what's the things that resonated for you that you want to maybe look further into, act on once you leave here. And as we go through the presentation, anytime you see this little blue handout hyperdoc, that's just a kind of a little visual cue that whatever that resource is, it's linked in that hyperdoc, so you can find that link there all in one place. And finally, we got 90 minutes together, so we like to have fun around here. So, and I don't like much more than tacos. So it is Cinco de Mayo, and of course I know Cinco de Mayo is certainly celebrating much more than just tacos. Huge proponent of the history teacher and me can't leave that out, but I do love tacos. So we're going to use tacos as a little theme here to keep our progress going, to track our progress. And I'll show you how that works in a little bit. Just a little teaser there. So that's our team. That's what we got in store on our end. So let's find out a little bit about who is here on your end. So I'm going to quickly launch this poll here. This isn't a difficult question, so I'm not going to give you much time. We'll take 5 seconds to answer. Are you mostly working with elementary, middle school, high school, or are you K-12, would you say? So we'll close that out and let's see who is here. All right, looks like we got about half the folks are elementary, and then we've got a smattering of middle school, high school, and then of course some K-12 as well. So a little bit more focused on elementary, which is fine. It's just nice to know who we have here. And speaking of, every time we work with anybody now, I'm asking this question. So we're going to launch one more poll for you, which is, what is your pandemic reality right now? Are you in person, just like there's not even a pandemic? Are you in person, masked and as socially distant as possible? Are you completely remote? Or are you some sort of hybrid of in-person and remote? So give me a quick snapshot of that, and then we'll close that out.
And probably at some point, Tara, they could have checked all of those boxes throughout this year, right?
True, right? Another one we ask sometimes is how many times has it changed for you? Like, that's a pretty interesting one as well. So it looks like we have about 50% are in person. There's a spattering there that are in person, like it's not even a pandemic, which is really, that's the first time I've seen anything in that category. Nobody's completely remote. That's interesting. But you can see there's still such a smattering. I find that so interesting, Dawn. Like, it's just, it's not going away anytime soon, is it?
No, absolutely not. No.
Yeah. All right. So thanks for, helping give us a sense of who is here. We'll start to tackle those questions now, and we'll start with, what is learning loss and how do I address it? And I kind of alluded to this at the beginning, but I got to get it out right of the way. I just feel like learning loss has become a little bit of a bad word. It's a troubling term, to be sure. I know there's all sorts of, resources or even just blogs and opinions out there about, what's the loss anyway? Or, is it really a learning loss, or is it an instructional loss? And what are we focusing on? I mean, and all those are certainly valid. But I wanted to at least address, where does that term come from? And it's important to know it comes directly from the legislation that is funding all of this, right? So the latest legislation, the American Rescue Plan, I'll just read this to you because it's the closest thing that we have for a definition of learning loss. I know, Dawn, you asked me about that the other day. Do we have a definition? It's the closest I could find. But it is, they just say to reserve at least 20% of your funds to address learning loss through the implementation of evidence-based interventions, and ensure that those interventions respond to students' social, emotional, and academic needs, and address the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on underrepresented student groups. So a definition, I would not say it is a mouthful. I would say it is, right? So it's not necessarily like it's a definition, but it does just give you a sense of, it's this sort of broad encompassing term, just to say, look, whatever you want to call it, right? Learning loss by any other name. There is we used to call it summer slump. That was another version of it. But how do we address the fact that there has been a lack of instruction, or at least a lack of focus, given the pandemic that we're in? So I just wanted to put that out there in terms of this troubling term, learning loss. We are using it for the purpose of this presentation because it's in the legislation that we're also going to be talking about how to secure fundings from. So that's kind of what our take on the term. I don't really care what you call it, but it's important to just sort of think about, what do we want to call it for sake of communication, and then how do we get about, really resolving it and determining what it is, which I know you've done a lot of work on that.
Right. And, like you said, Tara, learning loss is everywhere. You see it everywhere. And with that, there's data. Data is everywhere as well. And so I just wanted to pull out a couple of more recent reports there for winter of 2021. And one in particular, this was from Curriculum Associates. Now they, as Tara mentioned, the naming convention, they call learning loss unfinished learning. So that's why that's there. But their key findings, as you can see in that first graph there, for grades 1 through 8 in reading, that in their reading, it was greatest, that learning loss in the elementary grades, and this, particularly the early elementary grades. You can see that we've got 10% in first and second, 6% in third. So first, second, third, they're finding a little bit higher level of learning loss in reading. And then in math, here, you can see again a learning loss kind of dip, or a dip in the learning in each one of those grade levels. But again, looking at those elementary grades, first through fourth, there's a little bit greater loss than there are in the middle school grades. But if you look at those two graphs together, you can see that there is a greater learning loss in mathematics than reading.
I was kind of surprised by that, actually. I don't know why I thought reading would be at the same level. It makes sense to me because math is so much more, like it builds on itself. So I guess
right.
First I was like, wow, I was surprised it was such a stark difference.
With that, and the next data set I want to pull up shows similar findings between reading and math. So this is from Renaissance, And what they found is students are 2 points behind pre-COVID expectations at mid-year and 6 points behind in math. Now, what's really interesting though, they took this a little bit further and they were looking at fall data and then compared to now this recent winter data, and they're finding that those gaps, those percentile rank differences are actually shrinking from fall to winter. And they also indicated in their report that the expected growth approaching typical levels and that it really wasn't that big of a, I'm gonna say for lack of a better term, deal, as that maybe some other reports have found. And so EdWeek did an article on them just recently I read that actually called learning loss a misnomer. So regardless of what data set you're looking at, and you can see there's just plenty more, what really matters is what's happening with you, what's happening in your district. Where are those gaps? Where are those interventions need to be placed to make sure that your students are at where they need to be? Because who knows your students the best? It's you, it's your teachers. It's not some national report that's giving you the data. It's what you're able to find being in the trenches.
I really appreciate that advice too, Dawn, because I know, like, honestly, we went through such a rabbit hole of trying, because there's so much data out there, and you're like, well, what, you're trying to quantify that learning loss, if you want to call it that, and you'll find one source that says one thing and another one that contradicts it. And I like that advice. Just say, your kids, your teachers know your kids, like really just focus on your school and what you see in front of you, maybe rather than relying on too many of these studies that are out there and what other people maybe are saying, I think. I think it's also important, it also can get really tempting to just sort of get down in the dumps on sort of like learning loss and how tragic it's all been and how much we're losing. And I also don't want to be too like pandemic Pollyanna, which, like, there's a fair amount of that as well. But I saw this tweet on Twitter the other day, and it just really struck me too that, all is definitely not lost. It's not the comedian Tim Allen. It's just a real Timothy Allen, by the way, as far as I know. So he says, COVID learning gaps, maybe, but my 5th grade daughter can cook herself 3 meals a day, responsibly logs in remotely for her education, and has technology skills beyond anything I can comprehend. These are life skills that the past year created. So maybe it's a little rose-colored glasses thinking, but I do think it's important to realize that certainly there might be some academic losses, there might be some social emotional learning losses. We'll talk more about that, but there are also some real gains to focus on and to, I don't know, celebrate's the right word, but at least to acknowledge. So like you said, whatever data set you look at, or whether you just look to your own teachers or to your own students, we know that there are gaps. There has definitely been fewer instructional hours or quality in-person instructional hours than maybe we are used to. And it was already too much to cram in to a regular school year to begin with. So the question now is, how do we bridge those gaps? How do we identify what they are and bridge them? So that's where we'll start in with our 5 points to do exactly that.
Right, and it's great to start off with a plan. And so I want to share with you 7 ideas or considerations as you're beginning to plan for learning loss this fall. And the first is really just a shifting mindset, and it's just to remember you are not alone. There's no blame that needs to be associated with this learning loss. It's not an issue for students, for teachers. It's a very worldwide issue. It's the outcome of this pandemic. So shifting that and just realizing you're not alone, but really focusing on that quality of core instruction. And so what I mean by that is, remediation or reteaching is really not the complete answer. And this has been determined by countless research over the years. I have an EdWeek article there as well that quotes that and highlights that. But just really making sure you're focusing on that grade level curriculum, because if you're pulling students out for reteaching or remediation, they're missing out on that grade level curriculum that they need. And so finding ways to bring in those interventions, those gaps that they have into that grade level instruction is going to be key. Making sure you're providing engaging, high quality work, rigorous yet attainable, accounting for equity for your students, and creating authentic experiences. So there's an authentic context. So let's say you're a 5th grade teacher and you know what, the 4th grade, one of those unfinished learnings was some fractions. And maybe as a 5th grade teacher, I'm going to bring in some of that from the 4th grade that maybe didn't cover into an authentic context in my 5th grade class. So focusing on that quality of core instruction is so important.
I love that too, because I think, it's so easy to think about, let's remediate this or, or reteach this or bridge these
Right.
gaps. It's also about, or to kind of lower expectation of the kids, like, oh, it's a pandemic year. Let's just, but we need to keep those high expectations and let's just find the quality content that's going to get them to reach it there. Kind of what I took away from that.
Absolutely. And along those lines too, if you're looking for opportunities to shift from that reteach or remediation, focus on what are called acceleration opportunities. Now, I know a lot of districts are looking at this right now. What are those after school opportunities you can provide your students? What are summer programs? And also look at using some of the funding, which Tara's going to talk about shortly, to really have this highly qualified arsenal of tutors or interventionists to help those students get to where they need to be. Another consideration is to really embrace what you learned from distance learning and providing opportunities outside of the classroom for students to engage with some support using the technologies that they have. And so our next tip is to really make sure you're elevating that importance of formative assessment. Right? Formative assessment is so key at the classroom level, identifying those gaps. Those teachers know their students. So let's learn from the teachers, but let's also help the teachers find best ways to do that. So identify gaps in, oops, sorry, the screen just went ahead of me. Thank you. Sorry. So making sure that you elevate that importance of formative assessments, finding those opportunities for your teachers to get some training on the best formative assessment practices, and making sure they're spending less time on those huge, maybe interim assessments, but more time on those quick hitters, whether it's no tech or low tech. Like you see in that strategy sheet there, we have some low tech and no tech ways to formatively assess. Or maybe you need to actually collect data from your teachers, then have them do something like a Google form or a poll, or use tools like Quizlet or Socrative and do a pre and post survey to really assess where the students are on certain learning objectives or standards, and then have them share that in their PLCs and use that to identify those gaps for their students. So again, all those strategies are in that handy hyperdoc as well.
I love that you include some of those there, Dawn, because I've seen Dawn actually present some of these formative assessment strategies, and I love how teachers respond to how practical it is. So I love, providing a resource like that is something that you can give your teachers so they have like the tools to actually do some of those formative assessments and help you in identifying those gaps.
Right, because looking at state tests and looking at interim assessments, is important and is obviously valuable, but it's not the whole picture. It's not the whole child. So to really get that information, you need to ask your teachers, and they can get that information through those formative assessments. And then one way to really get that from your teachers is to survey them, ask them. And so we put together 2 surveys, which are also in that hyperdoc. We have a K-5 survey and a 6-12 survey, because we know those look a little bit different in the classes that they teach. But really have your teachers identify what are those areas of unfinished learning or learning loss, or just standards that maybe the students struggled with this school year or just didn't have time to get, that they know that are really important for that next year. And a tip is maybe have them do that before they check out for the year as well. So consider using that with your teachers. And then finally, our 7th tip is focus on power standards. So now, using that formative assessment data, using those teacher surveys, your district assessments, identify what are the most important things that you need to teach starting this fall. And so we've created a resource for you. This is, again, in the hyperdoc. We have it right now for K-5, but we are working on 6-8 as well. But basically, even if you don't teach K-5, this is a great resource to, you can even put in your standards and you can score them based upon these categories. So we've identified these 3 categories in the scoring: building blocks, how much future learning depends on the standard; multidisciplinary, so how applicable is this standard across content areas; and also the level of thinking. So where is it on Bloom's taxonomy? But I would encourage you to also incorporate learning loss level. So where is it on learning loss? And give that a number as well. And then, so what's really neat about this is that we've done all the work for you. So all you need to do is plug in the numbers, and that will give you a report that will then show what your power standards are. So it's just a really great tool as you are having your teachers share their data and work together to build a plan for fall.
I like that idea of, you can change out those categories. I mean, those are the categories we thought were, kind of really pertinent to identifying those standards, but maybe learning loss is one for you. I also had a great tip from one of the administrators who's using this tool, and they just wanted a little bit more nuance. We had scored these between 1 and 5. And so just make it 1 and 10, right? So it gives you a little bit more nuance between the standards. So it's really flexible little tool to be able to help you identify your power standards in kind of whatever way works for you.
Right, and I would say learning loss, maybe that might be double. You might want to weight that, like you said, a 1 to 10 as well, to really identify those areas, those gaps. Okay, so we have our next poll there. So which of these will you consider as you plan for learning loss? Are you going to focus on quality core instruction using power standards? Are you going to provide acceleration opportunities, so those opportunities outside of classroom time? Collect clear and actionable data? Elevate formative assessment, or ask your teachers? Give you a few seconds to fill that out. All right. Tara, are you seeing anything come in?
Let's see. I do. I just saw it come in. Looks like, do you see it now?
Okay, I do. Yes. Excellent.
Okay, yeah.
All right. So one of the areas there is ask your teachers, and then we have collect clear and actionable data. And, that is so important, making sure that we are not just assessing for assessing's sake, that we're really determining what are the most important assessments to give our students. And one of the strategies that I've seen administrators do is just take out a list of what are all the different assessments that are done in my school or the district, and then really look at it critically. Okay, what are the most important ones? And is there any overlap? Because if there's overlap, you need to get rid of them, because you really just have to focus on what's most important there. So excellent. Thank you guys so much for participating in that. And so now we're going to give you an opportunity to kind of process a little bit here. We want you to reflect. We want you to get a reward, and we want you to renew. So in that handy hyperdoc, you'll see an action plan at that first page. And if you want to take a moment to really kind of look through those 7 tips there that I shared, that you see on the screen, and of those, what are some things you want to take action on, or some maybe wonderings you have? Or if you have any questions right now, go ahead and put them into the question box in the webinar panel as well. But make sure that this works for you, and you're finding those pieces that are going to help you move forward as you plan for this fall in learning loss.
Yeah, as we talked about, we've got so much to share with you. So we thought we want to make these breaks in here where you can take a second, reflect. We know that's so important for student learning, also for us as adults. So just reflecting on what you just learned, that 7-point kind of, I call it a plan, or 7 key ideas. It's a really great way to just think about how to make that plan. So with that, hopefully you have put in your reflection, and it's time for your reward, right, Dawn?
I think so. All right, so you have all earned a taco shell. So congratulations.
So we'll build our taco as we go, right? And then when we're ready to leave, we'll be ready to go have tacos for real. So
yeah.
All right, once we kind of have a plan for how we want to address learning loss, then now we just want to unpack that a little more. How are we going to fund it? And then dive into some of those specific parts of the plan that might be a little bit meatier. So looking at funding in particular and ESSER funding, I want to start off the bat by getting a sense of how familiar are you with the ESSER funding. So if you think about 1 being, I've got it memorized, I know it cold. 2, I know the basics and I know where to learn and where to go to learn more. 3, I know the basics, but that's about it. 4, I've heard of it, but I don't really know what I don't know. Or what is ESSER? Where do you fall on that? 1 through 5. All right, let's go ahead and close that and see what we have here. All right, so nobody's got it memorized. That's good. So several of you kind of know the basics, but that's about it. And the big chunk is like, what is ESSER? So that's great. My goal would be to move you by the end of the section to roughly number 2, where you know the basics, or at least you know where to find more information. And maybe some of you will have it memorized because I'll show you where to get to the actual document in this process as well. So I first want to start, before I get right into ESSER, just making sure, I mean, schools' money is tight, so we want to make sure we're getting it from every possible source that we can. So looking under all those couch cushions, there are basically 4 types of funding that I want to make sure you know and are aware of. We can talk about federal grants, which is what ESSER is, competitive grants, foundations and corporate sort of grants or gifts, and then there's sort of crowdsourcing opportunities. So what we did is create a little resource here in our handy HyperDoc that essentially lists these 4 categories and has links to lots of different funding sources under each of these categories. So if you're curious about what competitive grants might be out there or what crowdsourcing opportunities are out there, this is a great resource for you to check out. And also, you know, if you think funding is really, really dry, as I sometimes do, even though I have this section and really enjoyed researching it, you'll notice there's a little fun factor. We call it put the fun in funding. So I'll leave that as a little teaser surprise if you want to go check out that resource. So when it comes to ESSER, several of you were like, what is ESSER? So I want to give you just, this is what I call ESSER at a glance, or to be cute, the ESSER compressor, because it's compressed information. So essentially there were 3 installments of ESSER funding. And so aptly named ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. So this chart just kind of walks you through when each of those came out. So ESSER 1 came out in March 2020, right when the pandemic really started to affect us most. And then at the end of the calendar year, December 2020 was the next installment. And then just recently, 2021 was the ESSER 3, or the American Rescue Plan. The second row is the legislation that supported that funding. And ESSER stands for, I always kind of have to check myself because I get relief and recovery mixed up, but it's the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. So that's a mouthful, just call it ESSER. Here are the amounts. So there were $13 billion with the first installment, a big tick up on that to $54 billion in December, and a huge tick up on that in March to $122 billion. And I would quick note on that too, in addition to the $122 billion, this footnote down here, with this ESSER 3, there's also another $3 billion allocated to IDEA, another $7 billion to Emergency Connectivity Fund, which also might be something that is important for you and your districts, and another 2.75 for non-public schools. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too for any of you that you're in that category. So there's 122 plus, right? And then a little bit more information on kind of timing. So for each one of these, it must be awarded by the state within 1 year of receiving it. So for ESSER funds, that's going to be between April and June of 2021, depending on when that award date was. For ESSER 2, those have to be awarded by the states to districts, to local districts, by January of 2022. And with this last one, they really upped their language here. This one's saying that it must be awarded by the states, again, to districts, in an expedited and timely manner, and to the extent practicable, not later than 60 days after receiving those funds. So they really want to get this out to schools and districts quickly, which I think is commendable. And then also good to know that for all of these, you have quite a bit of time forward and backward to apply these funds. So for all 3 sets of funds, you can use this money going back all the way to 3/13 when the state of emergency was declared of 2020. So you can go back all the way to 3/13/2020. ESSER 1 funds can go through September of 21. ESSER 22 can go through September of 22, and ESSER 3 through September of 23. So I know that was a lot, but that is the compressed version, trust me. And I'll show you where you can get more if you'd like. But that's the nuts and bolts of ESSER funding. Now, if you want to know how much did your state get, this is a really fun tool. If you're just kind of interested for your state, but also maybe you're just sort of nosy and want to know about other states. So This National Conference of State Legislatures website allows you to just plug in your state, and it'll show you exactly how much each state got. So here, you know, Michigan got about 390,000 with ESSER 1, 1.6 million ESSER 2, ESSER 3, you know, 3.7 million. I looked on and saw where our folks were coming from for this webinar. The 3 top states were Michigan, Illinois, and Indiana. So I went ahead and pulled those for you just in case you're curious. Illinois looks like ESSER funding for ESSER 3 was 5 million. For
I think
Indiana,
that's billion. Tara, sorry to interrupt. I think that's billion.
Sorry, that's way too many place value for me. Yes, billion, $5 billion.
We need all that money. We need all that money.
We absolutely do. $5 billion for Illinois, almost $2 billion for Indiana. So I think that's just kind of interesting to think about. But if you want to get even nosier, I like to sort of look, each state has to list on their State Department of Education website where those went to within the state. So here is kind of the way Michigan has done that. Here is how that money has been allocated to the individual districts within Michigan. So I showed you a few of those. If you don't see your state here, hit me up. They're not always the easiest to find, but I found several of them within each state's Department of Ed website. You can find where has the money gone within your state, which can just be sort of interesting, and to know kind of some of your neighboring districts, who's getting this money. It's always kind of a nice thing to figure out. So again, that links to that is here in the hyperdoc. If you don't see your state, just email me and let me know.
That is so incredibly helpful to that compressor and looking at that. And I guess I didn't realize that you could use it for past, like you said, back since the pandemic began. So this funding you can use from the start of the pandemic.
Yeah, and not all grants work that way. So I think that was really pretty smart, because some folks, if they were, you know, had the means or by some way or another, were able to sort of, especially I think about all the schools who really, you know, they did what they needed to get connectivity out to different places where equity was an issue. And so there's a lot of money that was spent before anybody knew if they were going to get any relief. So I think sending it back to when it started was definitely a plus that we should take advantage of.
Yeah.
So looking at how that money gets allocated, I think that's important to know as well. So we have this federal money. It's allocated to the states in the same proportion as Title I Part A. So whatever your Title I Part A funding, how that gets allocated is the same way this money was allocated. Once it comes to the state education agency, or SEAs they call them, that state agency can retain up to 10% of the fund, but they must give at least 90% to the local education agencies. Local education agency is a school district, or some qualifying charter schools can also be LEAs. So 90% has to go to the district. Of the 10% that can stay with the state agency, I think it's just good to know there's some stipulations to that, you know, if it stays there, 5% of it, no less than 5% has to go toward learning loss, our favorite term. 1% has to go towards summer enrichment, 1% toward after school programs, and 1% can go to administrative or some kind of emergency. So pretty small numbers there on that 10%, but it's important that they've, you know, outlined, you can see where their priorities are there. And then you see that play out again with what comes to the districts. So 90% goes to the districts, but districts with that money, 20% or more has to go toward learning loss. And like I said, I kind of shared that the best I can come up with for definition for that earlier, but we'll also look more about what is allowable for that. And then the remaining can go toward any other allowable uses, which I will share with you. So, you know, I think it's important. I don't want to hide the fine print from you. So this is literally a lot of text, but it is the fine print. So I just want to make sure you have any other requirements that I thought were pretty pertinent. And that is that you have to share the plan for safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services. That's one of the requirements. That plan, you have to seek public comment on it. It has to be made publicly available on the district's website following that public comment. You have to have the plan available no later than 30 days of receiving the funds. So I think that's interesting. I think that was one earlier. You can actually get the funds, or it's coming up. You can get the funds before you have a plan, but you need to have the plan 30 days after that. And if you had a plan before the enactment date, it's saying as long as it meets the requirements of the American Recovery Plan, then it's fine. You can still use that, which is nice. A few more fine prints here. You're not allowed to reduce per pupil funding for any high poverty school in fiscal year 22 or 2023. So they're, we're really trying to take this equity issue seriously and make sure that those high poverty schools are not seeing any drop in funding anytime soon. Some of these may go without saying, but you must track ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3 funds separately. Not gonna lie, that sounds like a little bit of a nightmare, but worth it for the billions, like you said, Dawn, of money coming in there. And you have to spend ESSER 1 before ESSER 2 and ESSER before ESSER 3. So you just have to spend them in order. And then, as I mentioned, 2/3 of those funds are immediately available to the states, while the remaining funds can be made available after they submit their plans. States submit their plans. So a lot of fine print there. So I just want to make sure you had it. If I had to boil it down, the biggest question I've been asked since I've started researching this, and since teachers knew I was researching this and administrators, is basically, okay, get to the point. What can I use ESSER funds for? So I'll show you the actual document. It's pretty broad. There's a lot of flexibility to use ESSER funds in any activity authorized by the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which is very broad. But essentially, these are the things I think that people are most interested in spending it on, that you can spend it on. So when it comes to learning loss, that 20%, there you can spend it on assessments. You could spend it on after school or extended day programs, particularly, looking at, I like what you were saying, John, it's not necessarily enrichment activities, but quality instruction that can help close that gap. And then summer learning or enrichment programs, extended school year. So you might kind of do some sort of project-based learning event with your students at the end of the school year, perhaps. Professional development, so your teachers can feel comfortable addressing all of these needs that are coming out of this. Instructional materials, so they have the resources. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And then family communications, explaining to families what they can do to help over the summer. If you have some, spending associated with that, that's all covered under learning loss. And then there's a whole host of other stuff. Basically anything that's authorized by some of the previous big education legislation is also fair game here. Even coordination efforts. I thought this was interesting, Don, like the way, because the state has, its own set, that 10% is doing stuff. So just any money you spend just coordinating with the state to figure out how to reopen schools or how to use your funding in kind of collaboration. That's all stuff you can apply for this funding.
Right, and maybe that's an opportunity too to reach out to your state for assistance on possibly collecting more data. You have your formative data, you have maybe other interim tests, but they're a way for them to help you really analyze it, because that's just a lot. That's a lot to really, to analyze and sift through. And I'm sure that that's a place that you could use that funding for too. Is that correct?
Yeah, you absolutely can. That would be a great use of, and one that you don't necessarily think of. That's why I wanted to highlight some of these that it's like, I wouldn't even think to necessarily plan to coordinate these efforts, but it's absolutely covered. So you can really get a lot richer data that way, absolutely. So another one that it's explicitly called out, as I mentioned in the definition, if you will, up there, is activities for disproportionately affected populations. So we know that that's been a major issue. So anything we can do to help with that is covered. Software, hardware, connectivity. I thought this was interesting, including sort of adaptive or assistive, for those students who might have some disabilities that we need to accommodate. So that's all covered. Teacher pay, just it flat out says, to basically keep your staff. You can use money for that. Obviously for safety and reopening, cleaning supplies, all of that. Even mental health services are called out in there as things that you can fund using this ESSER funding. And I thought this was interesting too. Anything that was called out in ESSER 3, which had a little bit more focus on learning loss, you can also use the ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 monies for those same things. It goes sort of retroactive back that way.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. But the key thing here is all of these it says in there need to be evidence-based. And I really like that term a lot, even better than research-based. So that's something we'll come back to several times throughout this presentation to make sure that, we're tackling this learning loss issue with tools and resources that are evidence-based. So I told you I'd show you the source. I always like to, again, that history teacher in me comes out. I like to see primary source documents. So this is what I read to you earlier. This is the first statement on the use of funds about it having to be no less than 20% for learning loss, and it goes on to sort of define that. But here's the next part of what it can be used for. And this is as far as my screenshot would go, is through A through K, but I think it goes to R, right? So it lists out everything that you can spend your money on. So if you have any doubt or any question, I encourage you go directly to the source. Here that link is in that handy hyperdoc, so you can see for yourself whether it's something that would be covered by this funding. So I mentioned it also specifically addresses non-public schools. So if you are a non-public school, this is a great resource for you. It's just the FAQs for the emergency assistance to non-public schools. So questions like, you know, which non-public schools are eligible to apply for services or assistance under this EAMS program? It'll address that. So here's kind of a list of those pieces. I thought this was a good question. Are faith-based non-public schools eligible to participate in the EAMS program? Yes, yes, they are. It does say that all services or assistance provided has to be secular or neutral, but a school that is faith-based can absolutely apply to it. So just just practical questions like that in this resource. If you are a non-public school, you might want to take advantage of that. And then if you like the ESSER compressor, but you want more, this is it's still a cheat sheet. It's not the full legislation, but I sort of took my my ESSER compressor format from this. You can see it has the topic here, but it has, you know, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. So just even more, you know, I pulled some of this out for the deadlines and such, but it's about 3 or 4 pages. So I'd still call that a cheat sheet. And we're educators, we can do that, you know. So I think that's a great resource if you just want to have a snapshot view of each of the different funding sources and what their different stipulations might be. And if you have any more burning questions about ESSER, 2 more resources or FAQs that I linked in there for you in the hyperdoc. One is a federal you know, FAQ document, and one is a Michigan FAQ document. So for example, from the federal one, may a state education agency restrict or limit the local education agencies or school districts' use of ESSER funds? I thought this is a really important one for you to know. The answer is no. The ESSER fund provides a broad permissive list of allowable activities in the section I just showed you. So the state does not have the authority to limit the use of those ESSER formula funds. So I'm not saying that the state would do that. I'm just saying if you find yourself in that situation, know that you are in the clear there to use those as long as it meets those requirements there in the ESSER in that document. And I thought this was a good one from the Michigan Department of Education. Is there a deadline by which NDE must award ESSER funds to the subrecipients? So it talks about the deadline in there. So just some practical things like that. I mentioned some, but these get down to the state level, which sometimes is nice to see in an FAQ. Mm-hmm. All right, so finally, I also thought, you know, the other thing that's nice is just to hear from other people. Sometimes administrators, we can feel like we're just sort of alone on an island. And so I reached out to some administrators that I know and trust about what are they doing to fund learning loss. So I thought I'd just share a few of their answers here. One talked about reallocating the use of Title I funds. So instead of funding food for parent workshops, she's moving that money to school tutoring and supports. Also some assessment tools and kind of seeing what free enrichment learning tools might be out there. So I thought that was just, you know, some good information about how someone's doing it. This was sort of a creative approach that Brent had, was really spending the ESSER money on being curious. That's their school's sort of focus. So they were looking at systems and structures that allow for teachers to explore their own instructional understandings through different professional learning subs, expanding coaching, revising their PLC structure. So kind of the whole PD element, but around their school's focus on being curious. So I thought that was kind of an interesting take on it. And then the last one, Julie here, she was looking at planning programs to really address those challenges that students faced with learning during COVID. So whether that was, you know, seniors who didn't earn enough credit to graduate, so implementing a graduate credit completion program for those folks, or kind of a AP summer bridge program, those sorts of things she used this funding for. So just always nice to hear what other folks have to say. I know this is a format where we, you know, kind of share all the research with you, and Dawn and I just kind of have this discussion about what we shared, which is interesting. But sometimes we do an event actually in July. We're going to have one called Better Together, where administrators just share what they're doing, similar to this. So we're going to do one of those on learning loss as well. So if you're interested in hearing more, stay tuned for info about that coming up.
Yeah, so, and that was really interesting what you shared, Tara. Sorry, I was just thinking about just the flexibility that's available. Yeah. You see all different ideas on how using the monies. It's incredibly flexible in your approach.
Yeah, everything from tutoring to graduation to curiosity, right? Yeah, definitely. Good. I think that highlights that. You're right. Okay. All right, so I'm curious to see how you're feeling now. We're going to take that same poll one more time. How are you feeling? How familiar are you with ESSER funding now? So let's see, anybody got it memorized yet? Anybody move up to 2 where you know the basics and you know where to learn more if you need it? Or are you still in that kind of, I know the basics, but that's about it? Or is anybody still under, what is ESSER? All right, let's close that out and see where we landed. All right. Okay, we're at 70% in number 2. That's where I wanted to get you. You know, we don't necessarily have to have, whoever has it memorized, come see me, because we can do this together next time. So hopefully that helps give you a little sense of where you can use that funding, and hopefully that can help, because it's a big task that we have in front of us, that's for sure. So again, like we talked about, we're going to take this opportunity to reflect, get our little talk overboard, and renew our thinking for the next topic. So just to summarize really quickly, we looked at the different types of funding. Remember, there's that resource to see what funding is available. We got that quick look at the ESSER compressor. We looked at how those funds get allocated across the states, if that's of interest to you. We looked at how to use the ESSER funds, what they can be used for, and then some specific FAQs for non-public schools, or the cheat sheet, and then kind of some information from other folks about how others are using the funds. So that's what we covered. Take this opportunity to write in your in that hyperdoc, that second section there under understand and use ESSER funding. If there's something that you want to take away to make sure this time is most valuable to you, write that in there now. And if you have any questions, you can certainly throw those into the question box as well. And we'll get to them throughout, or we'll also have a time for question and answer at the end as well.
All right, and all those resources are so incredibly helpful, because all of that legislation is so overwhelming when you get, you know, 50, 60-page documents sent to you and trying to wade through it. So it's really nice to see something so concrete and easy to navigate.
I have to say that's one of my favorite things about what we do, you know, is helping save people time, because nobody has time for that, you know. And so we, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, I don't necessarily want to, you know, drudge through all this, but the idea of bringing it to folks, I mean, that's really exciting for me. So it's great to see folks improve their understanding of it, and hopefully that's helpful to use some of those for sure. All right, you have now earned a protein for your taco. So we're gonna put, what do you want in your taco? Dawn, what would you put in your protein of choice?
I'll probably go with pork. Carnitas, my favorite.
I like the pastor. I think I'd go with chickpeas. My daughter's a vegan, so she's got me on this vegan kick. So I probably put my chickpeas in there. All right, let us move on, shall we?
Oh boy, that was very punny, Tara. Thanks.
I know. I wasn't even. I know it was on protein, which lettuce isn't. It's best like.
So we are now into the third part of our agenda, and that's addressing social and emotional needs. And we know that that is so important. And I just wanted to take a moment to tie that to learning loss. You know, how is social emotional learning tied to learning loss? Well, at the beginning, I shared 7 tips to, I'm sorry, Tara, can you go back? For some reason, the screen, thank you. I shared 7 tips on how to plan for learning loss. And they're there, you know, quality core instruction, acceleration opportunities, clear data, formative assessment, teacher input, power standards. And then we've got all this funding now that Tara shared with us, this, you know, billions of dollars, you know, potentially for states. And, but it all could be for naught if we're not addressing those social and emotional skills. And so I think this image says it all. If a child can do advanced math, speak 3 languages, or receive top grades, but can't manage their emotions, practice conflict resolution, or handle stress, none of that other stuff is really going to matter. That is completely true. So let's add social emotional learning to really fill in those gaps. But we can't just focus on our students. We know that. We need to also focus on our teachers. So there's a
graphic you came up with, Dawn. I think it really speaks to exactly where SEL fits in that picture. I think that's really clever. It's cool.
Right, and part of in that definition that you pulled at the beginning for learning loss, that the ARP identifies, social emotional learning is in there, right? So it is key. It is so important. But we also know it's important for our teachers. It's also important for our administrators, right? They need to take care of themselves in order to take care of their students. So, question, how are your teachers? Now, we know that teachers are stressed. we know that this was not an issue just because of the pandemic. It has always been an issue. And if you look at that data there, 2017, 61% of those surveyed from 74 million, their research that they've done, were always or often stressed. Well, let's fast forward 3 years, pandemic, and this was a report done from EdWeek in November of this school year, and look at that, 75% of teachers surveyed felt that their individual morale is lower than before the pandemic, and wow. 85% of the teachers thought reported that the overall morale at the school is lower than before the pandemic. Now compare that to where those teachers were at in March. So when the pandemic started in March 2020, 63% agreed that their morale is lower than before the pandemic. So you can just see the effects, the long-term effects of this pandemic on teacher morale, on stress.
I'm just thinking back to remember how stressed teachers were at the beginning of the pandemic, and you wouldn't have thought it could got any worse. And then you look at this and you're like, oh, it did.
Right. Well, and when we surveyed teachers at the beginning of the school year, and we found the same thing. We found that in September, October, November, those numbers just seem to keep going up as well. So, and you go to social media, Twitter, Facebook, I mean, you can see that. It's definitely evident. And just recently, a report I read discovered, and I don't think this is a big shocker to anybody at all, but stress is the top reason for teachers to leave teaching. And that's not even just because of the pandemic, both before and during. So you can see that in that data there, 43% of those teachers, the stress, disappointments of teaching weren't worth it. So what is the bottom line here? The bottom line is we need to take care of our teachers. We need to invest in them. But in order to invest in them, you need to invest in yourself too. So let's check in and where you are today. Now, if you're an Office fan out there, these you might really recognize, but which Dwight are you today? How are you feeling today on a Wednesday afternoon? Are you a 1, 2, 3, or 4? So remember your number. But if you're not any of those and you don't know who Dwight is or have ever seen The Office, then maybe just put a 5. So which Dwight are you today? Okay, Heather's going to put that poll up. There it is. Go ahead. Which one were you or are you? Give you a few seconds to respond. We'll see those results there. Okay, Heather, what do we got? Okay, I see it. All right, so we've got a majority at 2 or a 5. So they couldn't quite equate with those pictures, but then we also had a good percentage at number 1. All right, well, fantastic. We have no 3s and 4s, so that's great. That's great. I guess it depends on the day and what we're doing too. So excellent. Sure. Well, so we just kind of checked in kind of where you were at, right? Your self-awareness. But another question for you as an administrator, as a leader of your building, of your schools, is where are you? And when I mean where are you, I mean where are you on this matrix? And this is a matrix from Stephen Covey, who looks at urgency and importance. And basically what he did is he took this and made it a school edition of it. So if you take a look at it a little bit more closely, in quadrant 1, this is where administrators spend most of their time. This is what your daily activities usually are: putting out fires, working on student misbehaviors, making sure teachers' classes are covered, handling phone calls from parents, responding to emails, all of those different things that are important and they're urgent, but they really don't equate to any sort of culture building of your school or strategic planning, creating those environments to really help move your teachers along and your school community along. But it's kind of stuck in the weeds type of things that are important to do, but they take up so much of your time. So what we want to do is we want to try to get over more into that quadrant 2, which is really more of that developing your staff, tending to their needs, creating a vision, planning for the future, strategizing, creating that culture of support for your teachers. Well, it's great to see something like this, right? But it's a whole nother story to try to put that into action, because Covey claims that if we move out, to move out of quadrant 1, when we're in quadrant 2, some of those quadrant 1 fires will decrease, that you might not have to spend as much time doing those types of activities and start focusing more on that quadrant 2.
It
So
feels like
again,
a bit of a leap of faith to do that. You know what I mean? It's like, it's
yes,
hard to turn a blind eye. I don't think you can't turn a blind eye. They're urgent. That's
right.
the thing. Like to think like, okay, if I spend more time in this quadrant 2, it will actually decrease. And it makes sense logically, but that's hard.
Right. It's again, easier said than done. Like, it looks great on paper. So what I wanted to share with you are just some really quick ways to be in quadrant 2 that aren't going to be as onerous. So first tip to help support the social and emotional well-being of your staff is just remember to celebrate and affirm. We know this is Teacher Appreciation Week, but teachers really need that appreciation all the time, right? So shout outs at staff meetings, maybe thank you post-its in their mailbox, or quick little emails. Put it on a calendar so you're making sure you're hitting every teacher at some point, during the year. Maybe try a composition notebook. We did this in my old district, and that would just go from teacher to teacher as they just shared a positive affirmation in the school. Another tip is to rethink your meetings. So if you're having a staff meeting, maybe you do them once a week, every other week. Think about what it is you're going to be sharing at the meetings. If it's something that's more business related or housekeeping items, is that something you can possibly put in an email, or put, maybe you have a Google Doc, or some place where the staff can go, or even a video that you make just sharing some highlights that they need to know, and then save the meeting time for really more collaboration and PD focus. So rethinking those staff meetings. Third, we've already talked about this, but again, asking input from your teachers is so important. On learning loss, on school improvement, how they're doing, just getting that input all the time. It's basically getting formative assessment from your teachers about where they're at. Fourth tip is be there. We work a lot with teachers in professional development, and we know the power of having an administrator in there, because that shows that you value that learning that they're doing. And so it is very, very important when you're there. So be there when you can. Let's see, we've got our fifth tip. Just remember that you are the coach. I know it's hard. It's so hard because there's so many things, and being in that quadrant 1 and putting out fires. But with those opportunities, when you do have conversations with your teachers, whether it's you're doing a walkthrough, or looking at evaluations, observations, just making sure that those are turned more into coaching conversations as well, to help move them forward in their profession. And the last one, I cannot take credit for this. I need to give a shout out to Jerry Brooks, but he does this what's called object lessons. He's a administrator out of Kentucky, and he has an incredible Facebook and YouTube following, but he does this with his staff every year. He gives them a physical light switch to remind them to physically and mentally use that light switch to turn off their teacher brain. And he does this whole big art project. The teachers decorate it, they put it around the school walls, the students vote on the best ones, but it's really just a reminder of, what, it's okay to turn this off. And maybe between 6 and 9 o'clock at night, I'm not checking emails. I set that boundary. I'm turning that light switch off, and just giving your teachers permission to do that. So those are some 6 strategies that are tips you can use. Something else I wanted to share with you is these are just resources that you can give your teachers to help them avoid burnout. Something you can share, in department time or staff time, making sure that they have permission to turn it off, to turn that education brain off and invest in themselves. So we talked about your teachers, we talked about you and making sure that you're in that quadrant 2, but how about your students? Well, this goes unsaid, right? We know that it's important. We know that this year especially, tending to the needs of our students is very, very important in the social emotional learning. So how do we do that? How do we address that? Well, I guess I want to pull some data too here for you, and this really surprised me. This is actually quite recent data. This was came out in March of this year. In the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, looked at emergency room visits due to mental health crises from April of 2020 to October. And you looked at in ages 5 to 11, so your elementary students, 24% increase in ER visits due to mental health issues. And then our secondary students, a 31% increase.
When you first showed me that, I was just so stunned with that. Like that's real change and real dramatic and traumatic effect on our children.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so we know that tending to their emotional needs is very important. And so what are some ways we can make sure that we're doing that in our schools? So there is a framework, and possibly you're familiar with it, from CASEL. These are the core competencies. You see in the center of the circle, there's self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. These are things that teachers can do and integrate into their classroom, regardless of what they teach. So let's take a look at those 5. Heather's going to put up a poll here. Which of those 5 core competencies do you think is most challenging for the students that you serve? Is it their self-awareness, their self-management, their social awareness, relationship skills, or responsible decision-making?
Oh, that's a tough one.
I know. And you know, as a teacher, we know that there are so many social and emotional, issues that we have to deal with, every day. And we also aren't, the counselor, although sometimes we feel that way. Sometimes teachers feel that way, but there are definitely things that teachers can do in their class to tend to those needs and to help their students move along that path. All right, Heather, what do we have? Let's see. Okay, so it looks like we're kind of.
I told you this time. We got a 3-way tie.
Yeah, it is. Self-management, relationship skills, responsible decision-making. All right, and then social awareness and self-awareness. Okay, excellent. So I'm going to then skip through the self-awareness piece because it sounds like our majority of the students are there, but reflection journals are a great way to really check in and see how your students are doing. This is all in that handy HyperDoc too. So all of these resources, just to remind you. Self-management, setting SMART goals. This works for all ages. Again, we have resources for that. Great strategy. And then social awareness. So 67%, I believe, right, Tara, indicates social awareness, right? Well, PBL, project-based learning, is such a great way to address social emotional learning for your students. So I wanted to share with you a video of one of our projects. This project is called Lend a Hand. And in this project, these students learn about micro-lending, but they also learn the content, their English, their math, their social studies, their science. But they select a entrepreneur from a third world country to raise funds for in order for them to basically start their business and provide for their family. It's a pretty powerful project, and I'd love to share kind of highlights from that. So
the video is about 2 minutes long. I think, is that right, Dawn?
Yes, 2 minutes.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Then you guys enjoy.
So in this project, my students learned about microlending and were able to do some real world research on people that were in need through videos and different media that was provided by Blue Apple. They learned a lot about charitable giving and were able to have a real world experience of microlending to several different people on the Kiva website.
My favorite project was leaving people money and feeling good about it. She was going to make a farm for her livestock, that way they would have to go to school. They were trying to raise money to make a greenhouse. I ended up helping a woman who had 6 kids, and she couldn't afford a toilet, so I was helping her do that. I think the best project was probably making a puppet show, because it allowed you to be creative. It allowed you to make up whatever you wanted. This project helped me learn a lot about microlending. I didn't know it existed before this project, so I think it will help a lot of people.
Okay, great. So engaging students in projects that matter is a really great opportunity to get students to become more socially aware and think outside themselves and learning the content that need to learn all in one place. So a great opportunity to do that. And then the next, relationship skills. Again, just doing quick things in the classroom to establish positive classroom connections. You know, when I was teaching, we did good things at the beginning of the class, or what's up, and just taking a moment just to check in with everyone before you're diving into your content is so important to build that community in your classroom. And then lastly, I know this looked like this was also a 67% one, the responsible decision making, having the students reflect on their decisions. And this is a great resource, again, in the HyperDoc, to have students really check to see, okay, that decision I made, how did it go? And what did I learn from it? And just giving them time to do that. Other resources, Greater Good in Education, a fantastic place to look for some quick SEL opportunities at all grade levels. And then there's also a resource for your school. So we looked at how you're doing, how your teachers are doing, how your students are doing. Well, how is your school? This is a roadmap that CASEL has put out to help with that. And they've identified 4 critical areas or milestones to meet to the SEL implementation. All right, so that was it. It's time, yeah, time to reflect, reward, and renew. So take a look at your action plan there, and what are some ideas that you want to take with you as you start looking into next school year about social emotional learning?
I think this is a really important one. There's so many great ideas there. So I think this is one that's really key to kind of hone it in right now while you're thinking about it. You know, what are the ones you want to look more into? Because there's a lot of great stuff in there for sure.
Absolutely. Great. So what are they getting now? Oh, a topping.
Yeah, now you get topping. And Dawn and I had this discussion earlier. Some people are very particular about the order of their toppings, but you know, I don't know. I'm not so particular about that.
Yes, definitely cheese for me. So.
Yeah, it looks like they agree with you here. We got cheese on our little taco bill.
Excellent. Well, hopefully we're able to reflect, reward yourself, and renew. And now we're gonna, Tara's gonna end things out here with some PD and some resources to really help make this happen in your schools.
That's right. Our 4th of 5, we want to talk about professional development. And I can't talk about professional development without at least, you know, kind of talking about the elephant in the room or all the connotations that go along with professional development. And if you hadn't heard of or seen Eddie B, he's a former teacher turned comedian who's pretty funny to watch. So I got just a short clip of his take on professional development that I will share with you here first.
Last laugh, I'm gonna get it. So Brown, you got professional development. You got a PD. What PD stand for? Poor decision, prayer demanding, progress delay, physically draining, partial disaster, pretty dull, perpetually dreadful, passion dividing, purpose defeating, peace deterrent, purely disappointing, plain dumb. I know I was school. Last laugh, I'm gonna get it.
So I know you never said any of those, right, Dawn?
Oh, sure.
It obviously has such a reputation, right? Professional development. And there's a reason for that. I mean, there's a lot of times where professional development is absolutely dreadful. So I thought I'd do a quick here, top 10 complaints about PD. See if any of these are things you heard or maybe even said at some point. So number 10, this content is irrelevant to the subject I teach. Ever been in a PD where it's about something completely different? Why is the music teacher in a math PD? You know, let's not do that. Number 9, I mastered that skill years ago, right? They should be up there teaching it. Number 8, this person has never taught a day in their life. You can just tell the person who is teaching it has not practicing anything about what they're preaching. Number 7, no one asked for my input on this, right? Maybe there's something they actually really do want, but it's not that. Nobody asked. Number 6, this is so boring. Definitely have heard that about PD. You know, we ask our teachers to make instruction engaging for our students, but you know, we don't always put that same expectation on our PD for our teachers. And if you think it's going to get boring to do 5 more of these, don't worry, because it's the same one. I don't have time for this. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? Bottom line, teachers do not have time for anything, any kind of PD that doesn't respect them, that doesn't respect their experience, their expertise, and most practically their time. So I think that's just really important to remember that these things are real about PD. It has a reputation for a reason. But at the same time, it's no joke, right? PD can absolutely be a huge, huge game changer when it comes to your student success. So this research showed that, student achievement can improve by as much as 21 percentile points if the teachers receive substantial professional development. And that makes sense. I mean, just logically, the biggest determinant of a student's success is the person most closest to them who is responsible for their success, right? That teacher is so critical to that student's success. So, investing in our teachers' professional development that actually meets their needs is really going to be critical, particularly as we try to tackle learning loss. So if we look at that, what are the topics that are of greatest needs right now? What do our teachers and administrators want? What do they really, really want, right? So I'll share with you the 7 biggest needs that are happening right now as we are out there looking at things. So as we just talked about with all those great resources, social emotional learning definitely is near the top of this list, if not at the top of this list every time. Followed quickly by student engagement. This is also an area of need. So this is kind of a perennial area of need, but particularly when it comes to engaging in a digital or virtual environment, but also in person, right? How do we really genuinely engage students? Also differentiate instruction and equity. So looking at, there are going to be all these gaps when they come into school next year for 2022, whether they are skill-based gaps, whether they are equity-based gaps. Teachers need to be equipped to meet them where they are and to help all of them advance, like we talked about before, not lowering the bar, but making sure everyone has the tools and the knowledge and the understandings necessary to reach and surpass that bar. This is kind of a new one, I feel like, that's come up from the pandemic, and that is this idea of meaningful learning experiences, or kind of, as Dawn was talking, project-based learning sort of fits in with this as it ties to social emotional learning. But the idea of engaging students in learning that actually matters, that means something, that's relevant to the real world, if you will. And I thought I'd just kind of illustrate that by, this was an Ed Week article that an administrator said, the pandemic has made me realize that unless we find ways to focus on students as people and engage them as people and make the work we're doing important to them where they are now, everything is for nothing. We have to start with them as people. And I think the pandemic has just brought a level of humanity, I think, to everything we do that maybe has really caused this. I don't know why it's rise to the top, but that's my thinking on maybe why it has risen to the top, that teachers and administrators are looking for these, authentically engaging and authentically meaningful experiences in the classroom. Another one is inquiry-based content. That's really coming up. So getting the students to sort of think and getting teachers to teach in a way that, isn't so prescriptive, but a little more inquiry-based. And those 21st century thinking skills. I kind of think it's funny that it's sort of 21 years into the 21st century before I think we're actually sort of living this promise, before we actually feel comfortable on a Zoom meeting for the first time in 21 years, or some of those critical thinking skills. We see the importance of science when it comes to, creating these vaccines or whatever it is. I think those skills are perennial and they cross content areas, so they become all the more important, I think, during pandemic times. And as Dawn talked about, the social emotional learning for our students comes up there at the top of this list, but still in the top areas of greatest needs is the social emotional learning needs of our teachers and helping them avoid burnout, because the job has just gotten harder and harder this year. Remember back in March of 2020 when everyone thought teachers were heroes because they were having to homeschool their kids, how quickly that sort of faded, and now the job is just really hard, and that level of appreciation maybe isn't quite there anymore. So I just want to remind you, those, or if you're interested in remembering those, are in that hyperdoc. There's also some trends that I want to take you through that I think some of these might be here to stay, and I'll be curious what you think about that as well. But one is PD in our PJs. So we've got an acceptance of online learning now, especially for adults, that I don't think is going away. So there's an almost expectation for that level of flexibility that I think is a real trend of 2021 that's going to stay with us. Also, this idea of bite-sized and personalized PD. So this really increases the engagement and the participation because, like we said, teachers don't have time. So if we do them in, these sort of 30-minute or 1-hour focused sessions that they can apply what they've learned, I think that is much more meaningful. And if we can differentiate those as well. So we are personalizing them to where the teachers are and they have, an ability to kind of make what they need to make out of it and apply it in the ways that they need to apply it. Another trend is continuity through the school year. So giving teachers, a dedicated time for learning, for trying something, for reflecting on that, and kind of revisiting that throughout the school year in sort of small doses. And then the final trend is teacher driven. And I know as administrators that sometimes, you know, we have goals that we need to attend to and that we need to make sure the whole building is cohesive around. So I don't want you to lose that, but where can we find opportunities for teacher choice and ownership within that? I think particular because another sort of trend embedded in here is I think teachers are actually seeking PD maybe more than ever before. I think they saw with this, whoa, I need help. I don't know how to teach remotely. And they maybe had some positive feelings there actually to kind of build off of. So how can we leverage that, give them some choice so that they have more ownership? So it's a real win-win when it comes to PD. The teachers feel like they're heard and you know it's going to be implemented because they have some ownership in it.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that look like? I thought I'd kind of visualize that for you here. This is something that we've had a lot of success with. And that is really putting all those trends into place along with those topic areas. So, you know, it can look different for everybody and we can adjust this, but essentially if you're really focused on those meaningful experiences, maybe there is still something nice about a full day workshop, you know, something where you really dive in and get into the meat of something. So maybe twice a year you do that full day workshop, maybe an introduction to project-based learning in August and you follow that in January with sort of an advanced version of that. But in the meantime, sort of monthly topic focused sessions. So maybe an hour virtually on social emotional learning with your students that they then have a personalized action plan to try those strategies that month and then come back and reflect on the learning. And then in October, we move on to a different topic. All right, student engagement. Here's some strategies for that. Which ones are you going to try for your personalized action plan? You try it. You come back in November. So the idea of, you know, providing these smaller nuggets, also providing some choice. So a lot of folks have kind of mapped it out like this, but then given teachers, you know, say you have to go to these 2 blue workshops and maybe you can pick 3 out of these 6 sessions to go to throughout the year. Something like that, where they feel like they have a choice, but it's still aligned to the goals that you are setting. And including some sort of ongoing coaching as a part of that is also, I think, a really big piece of making, you know, like I call next level PD really, really work. So that's kind of a model. Hopefully that helps you visualize where it's at. So we'll take a quick poll and then we'll speed through some of the rest of this to get you out of here on time. But I'm curious, like I said, to know what you think of these trends. Do you think any of these are here to stay? The idea of PD in your PJs, bite-sized and personalized, continuity through the school year, or teacher-driven? Which of these do you think will stay? So give you a second to answer that. Let's go ahead and close that out, Heather. All right, looks like the teacher-driven. Look at that. That is really something. 88% of you said teacher-driven is here to stay. So that's really interesting. And continuity through the school year. I'm curious to see whether that one, you know, it's hard to maintain, I think. You know, it's sort of hard to schedule that and that sort of thing. But all those things, I think, have some potential staying power. All right. Like I said, I'm going to speed through these, but I do want you to come away with some specific examples because I think that helps you in implementing something that's useful for you here. So the other thing I want to show you is what successful PD can look like at both a micro level and a macro level. So just at a micro level, I want to not discount the power of something very focused, like here's a creative and critical thinking strategy. So something that we do with our students, we call it the 5-word challenge. And we ask these 4th and 5th graders, I think, to describe a food web in 5 words or less. And it can sound just like a gimmicky sort of thing, okay, like something fun and maybe a little challenging and maybe a little interesting, but what thinking is going on? But I challenge you to think about how would I describe a food web in 5 words? Like it's actually pretty hard. Like you have to think critically about what's really important about the concept, but you also have to think creatively with this constraint of 5 words. So I want to show you that successful PD looks like actually showing students doing it, transferring it over to teachers, and then seeing them apply it in the classroom. So I just want to give you a quick snapshot of how this looks. I'll show you, here is 30-second video of our students doing this 5-word challenge. And I think you'll see the power of how differently they each approached it, of the level of thinking that's going on when they're doing this simple little strategy.
What in environment? I can't do it. One of the things rules are about is eating animals, things, chain reactions, having sorry parts, dying.
I would describe food web in 5 words: reproductive, important, endangered, critical, and interesting.
I really like how each student took such a different approach. You know, the middle student there almost added some kind of comedy in there with the jump cuts. The last student there had some really more in-depth kind of philosophical and application type of interpretation. So something as simple as the 5-word challenge, you know, really does promote those skills, those 21st century skills, those perennial skills that we really are, so many of our schools are focusing on. So I just want to show you that progression. But we showed some teachers the same video along with several other strategies. And then when we asked them, it keeps wanting to do that, to tell us which one they wanted to try, which strategy they want to try, notice here that the one that we showed a video of students actually doing it got 65% compared to the other ones, right? So there's definitely a higher likelihood of your teachers implementing this strategy when they've seen students actually do it in a classroom. So I think when you look at successful PD, the ability to show students actually doing it is really critical. And then you see them take it into their own classroom. So from that same, you know, workshop, we were able to share with teachers, and then teachers shared with their students. This was a teacher doing photosynthesis and saying, how can you describe photosynthesis in 5 words or less? And they have a Jamboard here. So I just picked out the ones that I thought were particularly telling. My favorite one here is plants got to eat, people got to breathe. So it's technically 6 words, but you can spot them a word here and there.
Very clever.
All right, I know, I like it. So, or turning air into food, like that's only 4 words, right? But you can see that you can use that as formative assessment, like you were talking about, you know, elevating formative assessment. So something as simple as the 5-word challenge, but I think this process is really important to understanding what successful PD can look like. But what about at a macro level, right? We're not going to really, you know, transform our schools just by implementing the 5-word challenge, right? It's got to be broader than that. So here's an example of a school that we work with that, you know, we're all about sharing and learning from one another and stealing from one another, things that work. So I really liked how this process worked. The school had a goal of increasing student engagement through more meaningful learning experiences, just like we were talking about. And so we worked with them on project-based learning, growth mindset, differentiated instruction, cross-curricular integration, and how to work that into those project-based learning units. Virtual teaching was a big part of this one as well, and student engagement. So over 12 days, 26 hours, they each did some actual Blue Apple projects as a part of that, 24 teachers. You could see they really had some really meaningful, remember we talked about that word evidence-based, meaningful, you know, advances in the learning outcomes of their teachers so that they could feel more comfortable in teaching those kind of meaningful learning experiences. Okay. So in result, all the teachers in the program implemented 2 projects, these PBL BP units with their classrooms, and next year they're each going to do 4, which I think is just really cool, and it got so much notoriety too for their school. I don't know if you remember, Dawn, some of the articles that were coming out from the community, you know, sort of really kind of highlighting some of the good work that the school was doing, which I think is a really positive for everybody involved.
It was incredible, and especially in a year that, you know, in itself is just challenging, and taking on something so meaningful and so powerful. It was great to see.
For sure. So I'm going to take you really quickly through these because you can do these on your own with the HyperDoc, but create your own PD wish list. Think about what content is important to you. Here are some, you know, example topics, but, you know, or maybe it's those top 7 that I shared earlier. What's the content that's important to you? And then think about what methodology is important. What are some of those things that you feel like are must-haves for you? For example, having clear, measurable learning objectives that are successfully improving teaching and learning, for example, or that it's affordable, or that you have teacher buy-in, right? What are the things that are important for you? What are the things that are important for your teachers? And just use this kind of checklist, and there's a checklist in the HyperDoc that you can use to kind of evaluate whatever kind of PD you might be looking at. And if there's one thing that I would suggest you take away from this webinar, the one thing that would be the most valuable to you, it would be to get this needs analysis report. It's free. It's about a 5-minute survey for you to do it on your own. It's a pretty quick, you know, read of your gut level feeling of where your teachers are and are not comfortable in terms of inquiry-based instruction, project-based learning, content, instructional strategies, classroom culture, professional growth. These are some big categories that you can quickly get a glimpse. Once you fill out that survey, we will create this report for you that just gives you a snapshot of where your needs or where your gaps might be for your teachers. And then you can use that to, you know, work with us on professional development, or you can use that within your district for your own professional development with your own folks or with anybody you'd like. But it's a really helpful tool. So like I said, if you do one thing, I think this would be the most valuable thing that you could do. And then, you know, it's great for you to fill it out. You probably have a good sense of where your teachers are. But if you want, sometimes it's even better to get your teachers' input on this. And if you want us to survey your teachers, we are happy to do that. So I'm hitting you up again with my email here. So just ask me. I'll put you in touch with Aaron. He loves to do this. He's not here today, but he will help survey your teachers so that this same report is informed not just by your ideas, but by your teachers as well. All right, so I'm gonna skip this poll in the sake of time, if you don't mind here, but I'm just curious to see what you're thinking of for PD next year. So do just think about if any of those topics, as you start to create your own PD plan, what might be coming next. So take a quick second as you think about that, think about those 7 topics of greatest need, those trends in PD, that visualizing of what we call flex PD. Is that something that resonates for you? Anything in those success stories that you want to look for in your PD going forward, whether it's, at that micro level, making sure, that whoever you're working with is able to work with students, or at the macro level to kind of think about a school's goal. So think about how you want to create your PD wish list and maybe get that free needs analysis report. So that's our summary of the 4th step, and you've earned a second topping for your taco now. So it's starting to look like a taco now. I'm getting hungrier. And these I can just go through really quickly, but I think it's really important to not have your teachers look at you like this, right? When you tell the teachers everything you want them to do, but you don't give them the resources to do it, this is what you get. And you don't want to be that administrator. Don't be that, right? You want to equip them with what they need to be successful. So like I said, I can move through these pretty quickly because they're all in that hyperdoc, but it's just a series of resources that you can provide to your teachers along the lines of those 7 key topics that are so key right now. Because really these are better together, right? Instructional resources complement professional development. It's great to build capacity, gives them the understanding of why this stuff is important and how to do it, honors their profession. But if you give the instructional resources with it, you're ensuring it actually gets implemented. You're showing models of best practice, and you're saving them time, which is the best thing you can do for your teachers to not lose them, as to Dawn's point earlier. So I'm going to share 2 of my favorites, and then they're in the hyperdoc for each of these areas. But Dawn already went through these. We have some resources. I really love that decision reflection form. It really helps students hone in on the decisions that they're making and those SMART goals. So those 2 are in the hyperdoc as well as many, many more. But those are my 2 favorite for social emotional learning. For student engagement, my favorite resource that we have that you can share with your teachers, free resource. About every month we put out timely topics. So we just did one on Earth Day Explorers. So these inquiry-based lessons for that students can explore, but they're all kind of connected to something that's maybe in the news or at least timely according to the calendar. So that just really ups engagement right away because they can see the relevance. So engaging in distance learning, we have a webinar and a hyperdoc with lots of resources on that. That's my second one for student engagement. For differentiated instruction, it's just nice to give them some practical tools or practical strategies. So this little resource gives them several ideas that they could use in their classroom. So I encourage you to share that if differentiation is something you want your teachers to really embrace. And then there's also a webinar and a hyperdoc for that one as well. Meaningful learning experiences, we talked about that. So all these things are free. I will say the one thing I'm mentioning that isn't totally free are these Blue Apple projects, but they're pandemically priced at $60, and I'll show you some of the resources that go with them. I think it's well worth it for helping teachers make sure they're able to implement those. So I went ahead and put that on the list because I think it's a steal. And then we have free virtual PBL units. So there's one on preventing the spread of COVID. There's one on vaccination, understanding how they work. So really giving them teachers the tools to conduct these meaningful learning experiences. Inquiry-based content, we've got some science lessons. We've got a model that you can share with them as a poster. 21st century thinking skills, we've got some activities that you can share with them. These are free. Again, these are in the handout. So share with them, this one's 2 sides of every issue, helping them think about, debating and what are some 2 sides of some really critical issues that they would care about. And more strategy suggestions for critical and creative thinking, for example. Avoiding burnout, Dawn mentioned these as well. So I won't go through them again, but those are in the handy hyperdoc, but those are some of my favorites there. The bottom line, set your teachers up for success. Think about an alley-oop, right? You don't necessarily need to be the one dunking the ball, right? You need to be the one throwing it up there for your teachers to dunk. Set them up for success. So here's another resource in there. It's a funding request form. If you tell the teachers, based on maybe your ESSER funding, here's your budget, put that in here. You tell them the goal. I would really like to see this happen in your classroom. Have them put in there what resource they need and how much it costs. So, you're giving them some ownership and you're setting them up for success at the same time. So I just wanted to show you, we won't take the time, but that learning, that lend a hand project, if you want that to happen in a classroom, this is what can happen when you provide teachers the resources to do that. So a success story with project-based learning is looking at how you can use different supports, give them the resources they need. So for example, give them the project plan and supplies. That's going to save them a ton of time. Real world connections. It's so hard to find experts to bring into your classrooms. So if a project can do that for them, that saves them time. Cross-curricular content, finding ways to, make that rigorous academics a part of the project. Collaborating within and across your school or across the country even. And embedding PD. So these are all some supports that are in this resource that I mentioned. It's pandemically priced at $60, so I wanted to mention it as a way to make sure that you get the results that you want. If you want your teachers to implement project-based learning, give them the resources to do it, is the bottom line. And that gets you that evidence-based piece to know that, hey, this helped me make efficient use of my planning time. 100% of the teachers said it increased critical and creative thinking. That's the kind of evidence you want. All right, I know I sped through those, but I wanted to get you out at the end. It's 5:30. I'll take just couple more minutes just to wrap up. So here are the summary of things we talked about for resources. Make sure you kind of put those in your action plan so you know what to walk away with. You've earned your final third topping. So just wanted to put these out here. Remember those questions that we tried to answer, right? What is learning loss? How do you address it? ESSER funding, the role of SEL, and preparing teachers to successfully close those gaps with PD and with resources. So just so you have it, you'll have these slides will be in that HyperDoc as well, so you can revisit these and just kind of think about the summaries and what you want to take away from them. But like I said, if there's one thing I would recommend, it's probably that needs analysis. We don't have time for Q&A, but if you do have questions, definitely I'll hit our emails up there at the end as well. But I told you I'd give away a lunch and learn. So who doesn't love free food? What is a lunch and learn? Essentially, we would come to you virtually for a 45-minute virtual session. We would send lunch to your school for up to about 20 teachers. And, staff gets a free lunch. They also get some helpful tips and strategies. But most importantly, it's fun, informative, and respectful of their expertise, experience, and time. It's super important to us. So we are going to pick 10 winners to get this lunch and learn. So you can go to this bit.ly here. It's also in that HyperDoc. I promise you it's a very short form. It's first name, last name, and then an email if you want, or phone number to contact you to let you know you won. That's it. So I would say I'll wait. But it's
in the chat box too. Heather just put it in the chat box. So it's a great place to get it.
Yeah, I'd encourage you to open it up now so you don't forget. We are going to draw that on May 12th, and I know some people are going to watch this as a recording, so be sure and get in there. And if you are watching it as a recording, as long as it's before May 12th, you can be in that drawing as well. And then finally, in addition to the lunch and learn, if you're not one of the 10 lucky winners for that, we also want to offer a 20% discount if you book any of our PD, the Flex PD that I was talking about, or our Blue Apple projects. We also have field trips. You can do virtual field trips with our staff and help you kind of bring science to life with your classroom. So if you book any of those by the end of June, you'll get 20% off of those. We are a nonprofit, so our prices are super affordable to begin with, but we just like to keep bringing you free resources. So if you want to do any of those, the best way to do it is, again, to do that needs analysis. It'll get you started. Or if you don't want to do that, you can just email me. I think this is the third time I've shared my email with you, so now I'm going to be offended. But nobody emails me. I feel a little bit. I put it in there so much. But you can also access the link to the needs assessment there in that document. So hang with me. We got one more meme because I just have to see this one. We're going to do one last poll and then we'll let you go. Which taco meme is your favorite? Yeah, I'm into fitness whole taco in my mouth. Or I want to be where the tacos are. 3 ways to my heart: buy me tacos, make me tacos, or be tacos. And the last one, you can't please everyone. You're not a taco. So think about your number because the pictures won't be there when the poll comes up. And put in your number. All right, let's close it out and see which one wins. I'm very curious about this. Oh my gosh, everybody loves the first one.
Oh, that was the one I was going to pick too. That's hilarious.
Okay, I need to do a better job of. I was going with 4. You can't please everybody. You're not a taco, but okay. Wow, that's really impressive. All right. So thank you very much. I know we went 4 minutes over, but we had so much to share. I hope it saved you some time and it's something that you can find useful. If we can help in any way, tons with free resources, just some support, find you something, like I said, the state resources, whatever it is. There, our email again. This time it's Dawn's. Anyway, there are emails, but we really appreciate your time and everything that you do for your students. I really can't thank you enough for what is sometimes a thankless job.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so take care. Happy Cinco de Mayo, everybody, and we hope to talk to you soon and help you figure out that needs analysis.
Yeah. Awesome. Have a great end of your school year.
Absolutely. Bye-bye. Thanks,
Bye.
Dawn. Yeah.
Yeah.